Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Alden.
Thank you very much indeed, April, for these very kind words. And thank you all very much for coming out this evening, a kind of cold winter's evening, to listen to me. I hope I don't disappoint you. Shetland, The Cry, Blue Planet, Bodyguard, Two Doors Down, Doctor Who, Strictly. Look at any of these, made for the BBC around the UK, including here in Scotland. And it just takes a moment to benchmark the levels of quality expected by the audience when it comes to all of our content. Many people have hailed this as a new golden age for television, and I would agree. More acutely than any other part of the BBC right now, we are aware in Scotland, just weeks away from the launch of a brand new channel, just how high the levels of expectation are when it comes to our public service broadcasting offer. Our new BBC Scotland service will create over 900 hours of original content every year on a channel which will be confident and outward-looking and which will reflect modern Scotland. Those 900 hours mark a huge increase in the amount of television we're commissioning. We're working hard to make sure that our programmes will represent the whole of the nation, whilst providing an opportunity to showcase and nurture new talent and attract younger audiences to public service content. We're counting days now rather than weeks until the launch night, and I can't wait for viewers to see firsthand the results of such a broad range of commissions. At the same time, our building here at Pacific Quay is home to a raft of new technology jobs in the BBC's design and engineering team, working with the best technology talent in the country to maintain the ability of the BBC to be at the forefront of new developments in voice technology and audience platforms of the future. But what if this is not enough to ensure the relevance of public service broadcasting as we move into the 2020s? Is it even possible to reflect modern Scotland if the BBC itself is not fully reflective of the audience it serves? Over the past year, I've been privileged to lead a workstream across the whole of the UK looking at career progression for women in the BBC, alongside colleagues looking at the challenges our industry poses to disabled, LGBT and BAME colleagues, and at social mobility within the workforce. At the same time, for our new service in Scotland, we've embarked on new ways of finding the best talent and making sure that when hiring managers think they're looking through the window, they're not just actually looking in the mirror. Yes, the temptation is to focus purely on the content or on the pace of technological change. But if we can't get it right with our people, those making our creative decisions will fall by the wayside on all of our other challenges. This is certainly a time of transformation, but this doesn't solely apply to what we do with content and technology, but how we get there with BBC colleagues and those in the independent production sector. I know that's probably a difficult message to hear for some, especially at a time when the broadcasting world is moving at such pace, but it's a vision I truly support. Alan Archibald Campbell Swinton, in whose memory we meet tonight, proposed a cathode ray electronic method of producing television in the early 1900s and was clear and committed to his vision, despite one small issue. While Campbell Swinton's foresight was well founded, neither he nor anyone else at the time knew how to make it a reality. That would take almost another 20 years, but the vision, at least, was clear. And it's quite incredible to take stock of the exponential change this industry has seen in the past half-century. I remember well, as a young child, gathering with quite a few contemporaries to watch, yes, this will be a phenomenon that some of you won't recognise, black and white television in the very few homes in Tarbert in Haddis, which is where I grew up, where a TV set was owned. I often reflect on how generous and hospitable those neighbours were who had sets, not to mention how enormously patient they were at the never-ending stream of excited youngsters walking through their doors to watch Doctor Who. Yes, it did exist then, or said cars. It no longer does. It's quite a leap from a neighbourhood gathering around one television set to where we are now. John Burt, in his last speech as BBC Director General in 2000, predicted that the future would be that of on-demand TV services, that great power would be held by those who would control the gateways into the digital world, that the BBC's audiences would want services on demand and on the move. But even well before that era, in the 1920s, the BBC's first chief engineer, Peter Eckersley, was predicting the future in an extraordinary way, and I quote his words: "I have a dream about the future. I see the interior of a living room. The conditioned air is fresh and warm. Old-fashioned people would feel uncomfortable without the fire and fireplace. Others might miss the raucous brown box we used to call the wireless. But flush against the wall, there's a translucent screen with numbered strips of lettering running across it. The lettering spells out titles which read like newspaper headlines. These are the titles describing the many different broadcasting programmes which can be heard by just pressing the corresponding button. There's an advertising group that offers me The Tale of the Little Red Drum, Tobacco Hour, and Horlick's Current Affairs Debate. Television programmes are set apart. I can, if I like, see the repeat of an old favourite, The Importance of Being Earnest, or Centre Court Men's Semi-Finals Wimbledon. Not bad for a summer evening at 6 o'clock. Of course, it's only a dream, but not so completely fantastic as some might imagine. It could all be done using wires rather than wireless to distribute programmes. Let a cable no thicker than a man's finger be laid out along the street, outside the houses, and the main part of the installation is completed." That was Peter Eckersley in the late 20s, well before 1920s, that is, before the advent of television, describing the fully connected world that we have today. Certainly these feel like rapidly shifting times on all fronts, social, political and technological. The environment in which BBC Scotland exists has fundamentally altered in a media marketplace with a mix of challenges and opportunities. But change must surely be embraced. It's been said that 70% of businesses which change fail, but 100% of businesses which don't change fail. A changing landscape can be an exciting landscape, however uncertain. And I believe that these are exciting times at BBC Scotland, with such a key new development, our new channel, only weeks away. Just as Peter Eckersley envisaged it will live in a digital framework also, with eyes firmly on both linear and non-linear patterns of audience consumption. This new channel will serve the BBC's core mission, established by John Reith, a Scot and founder Director General, to educate, to entertain and to inform. And what of the BBC's early motto, first ascribed to its coat of arms in the 1920s? Nation shall speak unto nation. Is that any less admirable as a motto for a Scottish public service broadcaster in 2019, in a world where existential threats are a real concern through wars of words between hegemonies, terrorism, and continuing wars on terror and despotic regimes? Over the past 4 years, as we commemorated through our output across the BBC the centenary of the Great War, I was reminded frequently of the inventiveness and passion for our public service vision expressed through our content. You may have seen just last month a range of deeply moving content about the Islair tragedy and how the legacy of that terrible event cast such a long shadow over one of Scotland's communities. Indeed, I think it has been the role of the BBC not just to retell some of the history of 100 years ago, but to shine a fresh light on some of the material, particularly as we work in partnership with others. This public service content is at the heart of why I feel the BBC still matters so much. This year, the BBC will showcase the story of Scottish ballet on our brand new Scotland channel and partner with Northern Ballet and Phoenix Dance Theatre via our BBC Arts strand. CBBC has just recently unveiled its brand new programmes for 12 to 15-year-olds, an audience perhaps underserved a little other than through Bite Size before. An audience, and this series will reflect the highs and lows of their lives in the UK today. This multi-genre strand will explore the challenges faced by young people when it comes to issues like mental health and sexuality, and give an insight into what this age group are talking about with their friends and families, what's important to them, and all the positive outcomes they're capable of achieving. Meanwhile, from the 1st of this month, BBC News Persian has presented content across its TV, radio and digital platforms, taking a new look at the events which led to the creation of the Islamic Republic of Iran in 1979, and exploring various dimensions of the revolution's legacy. Where else, other than in this publicly funded arena, would such diversity of content be offered to our audience? The BBC is approaching its centenary in 2022, and the launch of our channel this month will shape the BBC in Scotland for the next generation, true to our public service values. My hope is that the channel will play a key role in achieving a more creative, more distinctive, more personalised BBC in Scotland. It will build on the BBC's many strengths, but remain true to our founding mission: to inform, to educate and to entertain. And here's just a small taste of how our investment in that new channel will look. So the BBC has a commitment in its charter to support the creative sector across the UK, and as I hope you can see there, the investment in the sector in Scotland is producing some truly fantastic results. I believe it is critical that the BBC across the UK ensures that the sector thrives. And just last month, the BBC's Director General, Tony Hall, reaffirmed his commitment to go further and faster with the BBC's work outside London, as he is convinced, as am I, that it will make the BBC creatively richer. For the last 5 years, 50% of the BBC has been based outside London. That was a good start, certainly better than any other major media business in the UK. But it remains the case that too many creative, talented people risk feeling locked out of an industry that remains stubbornly tilted towards just one city in the southeast of England. That the Director General recognises this is surely great for us in Scotland, and especially with such excellent work in the Scottish sector already bearing fruit. Of course, all our ambitions for the BBC and for the Scottish sector depend on our future funding. The BBC has been very open about the current funding squeeze, and we've described publicly the very real danger that it could get worse. In November, we launched a consultation on the future of free licence fees for people aged over 75, and that consultation closes next week on the 12th. Of course, we know that for some pensioners, the free licence can make a real difference. But we also have to be straight and open with everyone about the implications for the BBC of continuing to provide a concession in the years to come. From next year, the cost of providing any concession passes from the UK government, who have funded it since the concession was first introduced 20 years ago, to the BBC. So the BBC must decide what to do next once the UK government scheme ends. The BBC could copy the UK government scheme, or it could choose to have no such scheme at all. And there are also a range of options noted in the consultation which fall somewhere between those two ends of the spectrum. But let's be clear, if the existing cost of this concession were to continue past 2021, it would eat up around a fifth of the BBC's current licence fee income. That would be the equivalent of what the BBC currently spends on BBC Two, BBC Three, BBC Four, CBeebies, CBBC and the news channel combined. This is tough stuff. Whatever we do, we have to think about what's fair. That means fairness to pensioners and fairness to other licence fee payers. This is very much a decision to be taken by the whole of the BBC's board, and I would envisage that everyone in this room tonight would have a view on what the BBC should do. Please do engage with the consultation. That deadline is looming, and we do need to hear your thoughts by Tuesday of next week. As ever, when I mention BBC funding, the incoming flak is not usually far behind. It has been said in the past and recently in some commentary pieces that the BBC is too big or is bloated. I completely accept that commissioning and producing content from within a £5 billion budget is a position of strength. But the nature of the ever-changing global marketplace is that it is now truly global. If the BBC is too big, this is compared to whom? The BBC's £5 billion must be viewed in both a UK and worldwide context, where the United Kingdom's traditional broadcasters are up against giants on a different scale. Sky and BT each turn over at least double the BBC's budget, and globally, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Facebook and Google are all reaching consumers of content every day with material backed by resources on a different planet relative to those of the BBC. And it's in this market that we are increasingly judged. For a young person online in Scotland this evening, there's a world of content at their disposal, stimulating learning as well as entertaining them at the click of a button. But how much of that content truly speaks of their lives, represents their worlds, and reflects their experiences? Recently, the Scottish MP Marion Fellows was in conversation with a colleague of mine as she prepared to campaign in Parliament for greater commitments to children's television broadcasting. Mrs. Fellows recognised the huge amount of children's content produced by the BBC, and much of that in Scotland. But one of Mrs. Fellows' prime motivations in raising the issue was this point of children seeing themselves on the screen. She no longer wanted to hear her grandchildren and their friends talking like SpongeBob SquarePants. And this is not an uncommon tale. In 2016, a small team from BBC Scotland, looking at social media change and our engagement with younger audiences, began a project talking to young people in schools about how they related to traditional broadcasters. It pained us to hear young Scots able to describe the distinction between a Bronx accent and a Queen's accent, but not able to differentiate the Doric dialect from the Orcadian. Our audiences told us that younger role models who looked and sounded like they lived in contemporary Scotland were hard to find, but desperately sought. And that in the UK-wide media, a Scottish person was, quite an old theory, it is quite an old quote, either shooting grouse or shooting up. But I mention it because I think that analysis, however exaggerated, still exists. From this feedback, however, was born a new online offering from BBC Scotland called The Social. This social media service has grown and evolved, enabling young filmmakers from across Scotland to bring some amazing experiences to a much wider audience while fulfilling those key BBC values. We've seen recent videos exploring issues around body confidence, how to get the perfect vegan haggis, how to take a halal holiday, what happens when you love your pet more than your partner. And yes, people still enjoy the kilted yoga video, which has now been viewed many millions of times. Issues highlighted by Scotland's young filmmakers have resulted in parliamentary questions and government responses, and indeed generated headline news stories in their own right. I would expect to see talent from The Social appearing on our new channel. If we can continue to answer the challenges of representing all of Scotland's people, and not just via online platforms, but through all of our existing services, we will ensure that BBC Scotland will be in the habit of reflecting the country to itself and to the world. The success of The Social is now being exported to other parts of the BBC, with Scottish talent helping to develop similar formats around the UK. But let's not overlook what made The Social such a success. Yes, it was the grit and determination of the original project team to do something different, but at heart, that something different hinged on getting closer to our audiences and being more reflective of them and connected to their lives. Over the last 18 months, an increasing number of BBC programmes have signed up to the 50-50 challenge. The goal was simple: to get an equal split of male and female representation on air. Both inside and outside of the BBC, more journalists and editors are realising that while the media didn't invent gender bias, it has a key role in perpetuating it, particularly covering areas such as science, technology, or even politics. We've now announced a target of 50-50 across all of BBC's programmes and websites by April of this year, which is a challenge. And that challenge is also being piloted by media organisations in the US and Europe. As well as what we do on air in reflecting audience composition with gender balance and ensuring a better reflection of other underrepresented groups, we also have to deal with our workforce off air. This must be essential for all of the BBC services in the future, on air and behind the scenes. I joined the BBC in my late 20s. Between arriving here as a researcher and taking up the role I occupy today, I've worked in a wide range of areas across the organisation. I also had 3 children, a daughter and twin sons. My career at the BBC has been an amazing and fulfilling experience. Of course, it has also brought all the challenges of juggling responsibilities as a working mum. And there have been times when I wondered if I should just give up, when the feeling of guilt that I wasn't doing either job well enough, parent or BBC employee, got too much. As I mentioned, Tony Hall asked me to lead the project UK-wide, looking at making the BBC a great workplace for women. And over the last year, I've been privileged to meet and talk to so many women and men across the BBC about their experiences. Some of the experiences have been good, some of them bad. All of them have felt essential to understanding how best we can support the career progression and culture for women in the BBC today. Over the course of these conversations, I've been struck in particular by 3 things. First, how proud everyone is to work at the BBC. The commitment to the organisation and determination to go the extra mile have been inspirational. Second, what a good workplace the BBC already is for women. We have done a lot, but it's clear that we have so much further to go. We could have done better in the past. We can and must do better in the future. But third, and perhaps most importantly, what a great opportunity we have right now. For all of us at the BBC, men and women, it's a chance to reset the dial and make the BBC an even better place in which to work and with which to work, to learn from everyone's shared experience. It's also essential for us to challenge ourselves on a regular basis to ensure that we are doing all we can. What's clear from our work is that there is a huge appetite for change and a real desire to embark on this cultural transformation together. This is about much more, however, than any single individual. It's about a step change in the culture for gender equality that will underpin the position of the BBC as the world's best public service broadcaster, delivering even more in the future for our people and our audiences. My report contained a range of recommendations which are now being delivered and which I truly believe will enable our workforce to much more easily reflect the audience it serves. It didn't stand in isolation as a report. There were 4 other reports, as I mentioned. We looked at social mobility in the BBC. And yes, I've had several raised eyebrows expressed when I've told people that the BBC's social mobility work was being led by the controller of Radio 3. But actually, Alan Davies' story is an interesting one. He was told by a person in authority while a teenager, growing up as the son of an electrician in Stockton-on-Tees, that a career in the arts was not for the likes of him, a boy with working class parents. He'd be expected to do something else, such as work in the local factory. Well, he didn't. And he now runs the Classical Music Network, which collaborates, of course, on a regular basis with us here in Scotland with the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra. Alan, in his report, noted that the BBC has made an important first step in asking its staff about what their parents did and getting an indicator of the mix of social background of the people who work here. He found that employees from low and intermediate income households make up 39% of the BBC's staff base, but the national equivalent is 67%. So we have a few things to do, including looking at how we recruit and how we reach out to young people who, like Alan, would not have ever thought that the BBC was for them. It also means we need to look at how people from different backgrounds progress in the organisation so that our creative and other output reflects a wide range of talents and backgrounds. I fully endorse Alan's work, and I believe in Scotland, particularly with our recruitment on our new channel, we are slightly ahead of the curve. The BBC's current investment here has created new jobs, 80 extra roles in journalism, 88 new jobs in design and engineering, and additional posts to support the new channel and growth in other parts of the organisation. That will take us to over 200 new posts funded by the BBC in Scotland by the end of March, including 21 local democracy reporters who work on local newspapers around Scotland. For our new roles, we have deliberately taken a radical approach to recruitment here and have centred it around 4 key principles. hardwiring diversity, being proactive, not passive, recruiting for attitude, and giving a generous welcome. More specifically, the process itself has been completely revamped. We now have no CVs for some roles. We have video applications and questions tailored to test principles. There's increasingly diverse interview panels and, of course, a rigorous assessment process. To support this throughout this last year, there's been a large amount of outreach work. We hosted 6 discovery events around the country to tell prospective candidates more about the BBC in Scotland and the types of roles we had on offer, precisely to counter that notion that some candidates might feel the BBC is not for them. And we have actively hired individuals who came along to these events who normally would not have considered applying to the BBC. And here's how some of our new starters are getting on.
Hi, I'm Francesca Wolfe and I've just started as the new team assistant in Alden McKinnon's office.
My name's Fraser. I work with the 9 News programme, which is the new news programme on in February on the new BBC Scotland channel.
My name is Morgan and I work with BBC Scotland News on the digital video team.
My name's Roisin and I'm a researcher on the new 9 O'Clock News programme.
I think most importantly I look for support and beyond that career development, and I think that's something that I'll definitely get within the BBC. Everyone's been so friendly and encouraging.
I think it's really important to be working in an environment where you're encouraged to learn things and to thrive and develop your skill set. So yeah, the culture and the atmosphere and just working in a friendly work environment makes a huge difference.
What's important to me about being here? That I work hard and that I try my best and that I help others the best I can. I don't believe anyone kind of owes me anything. Health benefits don't matter. The only gym I know works down the road from me, so that's all that matters to me.
The people, I think I'd want to work somewhere with like a mix of people. Some people that are like me, some people that aren't like me, because it's good to get different people's opinions. But probably the people would be the most important thing to me.
I found that it's a fantastic work environment, loads of great teams, it's extremely creative, and you can really kind of shape your own career and push it in a direction that you'd like to go in. So you really get given that flexibility, which I think is really important.
It's good, it's chilled out, it's inclusive, I think it's a great place to work.
I came to P2 when it first opened for a tour and I was just totally inspired. I wanted to see how everything worked and get involved, and so I'm really excited to be here.
And what I love about the BBC is everyone's so welcoming and is willing to help you out, and there's so many opportunities to learn and grow in what you do.
Not what I expected. I bought a lot of like sensible office clothes from like Mango and places like that, and then on day 3 it kind of went out the window because I was like the most dressed up person. Here a lot of shorts and flip-flops go on, I see.
Overall it's a fantastic place to work, and especially as a young person as well. It's really great at developing young talent, so I'm very fortunate to be working here.
I have to do something about these shorts and flip-flops that I keep wearing every day. So we're also fully committed to our role as a training ground for the wider industry in Scotland. And this year we've invested in 10 places on the journalism trainee scheme and 11 production apprentices. These trainees are located not just here in Glasgow, but the BBC's key sites around Scotland. We've also entered into partnership with Boost Employability, a charity providing industry-led broadcast training for individuals whose vision is to support people out of poverty with opportunities to participate in a modern Scotland. We've engaged with Boost and launched a scheme targeted at supporting 20 individuals over 2 6-month programmes to compete for entry-level work in the industry and to develop valuable life skills. In the end, this is a hard-nosed choice. It will ensure we are a better and more creative organisation, more able to reflect all the talents and interests of the population of this diverse country in which we live. We'll make finer content for audiences and tell stories in a more authentic way, whether that is drama or the delivery of news. That's what the BBC is all about. And not just the BBC. I cannot think of a single recommendation in any of the recent BBC reports, Alan Davies and mine, and the reports on disability, ethnic diversity, or on LGBT colleagues, which would not apply to anyone supplying content to the BBC. For that new content to truly fly, our workforces inside and outside the BBC our partners and our audiences all need to be in the same place. Indeed, it's completely critical that audiences continue to believe that public service broadcasting is relevant and useful in their lives. A BBC and its partners which does not stay close to its audience, if it doesn't look, sound and act like its audience, risks becoming irrelevant. And we must also keep pace with our audiences. As you'll be aware, reflecting news and current affairs will be a key component of our new service. The BBC, in principle, should neither lead nor lag behind constitutional changes in the United Kingdom. Our priority around the country is to ensure we arm citizens in all four nations with the information they need to make sense of their world and help hold those in power to account. In a more devolved UK, news in some parts of the country simply does not apply in others. The politics and economics of the country have become more varied, the business of reporting more complicated. The BBC has a responsibility to ensure it is informing the audience in the most effective and relevant way. We believe the time has come for us to strike a better balance between the delivery of pan-UK news and news tailored to the distinctive needs and agenda of the devolved nations of the UK. And our new programme will do just that. The 9 o'clock news will launch on Monday, the 25th of February, edited here at Pacific Quay by Hayley Valentine and presented live every night. This will feature 60 minutes of news and comment from around the world, around the UK, and around this nation of ours, reported through a distinctly Scottish prism. I'll show you a clip of it now. That was a clip from one of the recent pilots that we conducted. And robust news coverage from a Scottish public broadcaster is now more vital than ever. In a digital world, one increasingly filled with user-generated content, it can be difficult to determine what is real and what is not. There are hundreds of millions of Facebook profiles, but amongst those, it's estimated by Facebook itself that multiple millions could be fake. The BBC defines fake news as false information deliberately circulated by hoax news sites to misinform, usually for political or commercial purposes. As we all know, social media, and particularly Facebook, amplify these stories and can enable their authors to make large sums from online advertising. The role of social media in this phenomenon means that the audiences for fake news tend to be younger than users of traditional news output. In accordance with the BBC's editorial guidelines, we are committed to achieving the highest standards of accuracy and impartiality, and to being rigorous in establishing the truth of any story. And of course, we strive at all times to avoid knowingly misleading our audiences. Over time, we've adopted a number of forensic techniques for scrutinising contributions from members of the public, be they pictures, video, or audio, and have self-help guides and training for BBC journalists. In recent years, the team's focus has shifted towards an examination of contributions and stories found on social media platforms using open source geolocation software and third-party tools. You may have seen the work of the BBC's principal fact-checking service On Air, Reality Check, which runs on TV, on the website and via social media. This service challenges news stories and statements from public figures which may be false or misleading and presents the verifiable facts instead. Beyond the BBC, fake news has highlighted the difficulties of platforms like Facebook, Google and Twitter, which have tended to provide unmediated access for large audiences to this material. In a letter about the future of Facebook, its founder, Mark Zuckerberg, conceded that fake news polarised views and filter bubbles were damaging common understanding. He committed his platform to play its part in resisting this trend. I'm sure we all know that on the web, everything is not always what it seems. Wikipedia isn't always wholly accurate, and we should tread warily when offered news or information from sites in which we're not necessarily 100% confident. It's for that reason, more than any other, I contend that the need for sources of information in which we can trust, and in particular for authoritative, impartial and independent journalism, is as paramount today as it has ever been, and arguably more so. BBC Scotland's news teams via our existing strands and our new programmes coming this month, will continue to play their key part in delivering this trusted source. Sometimes being the bearer of the truth can prompt the most vicious attacks. And it's been painful to see in some of the Brexit coverage the attacks on journalists for daring to report one point of view or another. We receive letters and emails telling us that the BBC has a duty to back Brexit, and letters and emails telling us that the BBC has a duty to oppose it. The BBC has a duty to do neither. It must report Brexit, however polarising, freely, fairly and impartially. And we must help the audience understand how and why the BBC cannot and never will take sides. By looking and sounding more like our audiences, we will have much more credibility when making this case and continuing to make the case for why public service broadcasting remains vital to a fully functioning democracy. For the BBC to be part of that democracy in the future, it must look and sound like all of society's component parts. The dawn of a new channel is such an exciting time to lead the BBC in Scotland. And it's my mission to ensure that with BBC Scotland's next chapter, we seize this chance, both from an evolutionary and a revolutionary perspective, to engage with and enable our audiences and partners. We must have the courage of our convictions. Get it right and the consequences will be profound, not just for broadcasting, but for the whole of Scotland's creative landscape. Audiences will remain firmly at the heart of what we do, and we rely on them to remain our critics, our contributors, and our constant companions. And whatever further challenges lie ahead, we can sow the seeds now for a healthy future for the BBC and for the sector as we move into the 2020s. Yes, we've got a lot of work to do, but the results are within our grasp. And I so look forward to collaborating with all of you on that journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donalda. So we've got time for a couple of questions. We do have a mic. If you could identify yourself just before you say your question, that would be great. And, oh, here we are. First one up, thank you.
My name is Paul Tucker, University of the West of Scotland. Thanks, Donalda. It's always really good to hear people talking so passionately about the role and work of the BBC. I've got a question about the new channel, if that's okay. It's sort of a local one and a more global one. Given that I understand that the new channel is aimed at us to try and get a slightly younger audience, I wondered what conversation there was around not having a channel but putting it on all online in a kind of a BBC Three model. And then the bigger question is what you think the future of scheduling is in TV in the future.
Okay, I'll attempt to answer that, and if my colleagues here at the front feel I haven't answered it properly or well enough, I'm sure I know they're not shy. Whilst we are attempting to address kind of younger audience deficits with the channel, it is not going to be another BBC Three. What we will want to do is, as I said, reflect some of the talent that we've nurtured over the years through other platforms to making kind of longer form content, and in fact we'll feature shorter form content. The channel will also have an expression online, however, and will be available on the iPlayer. And scheduling for the future, well, I mean, I think we will continue to occupy the linear space, but increasingly, I think we have to look at the way audiences are consuming, and it's not just younger audiences now who are consuming much more on demand. Also, older audiences are beginning to shift into that space. So I guess it's just, whilst we're still traversing, serving kind of different demographics who are consuming differently, we're going to have to look at scheduling in a quite a traditional way, but also with one eye to the future. Would that be fair? Tony?
Yeah, absolutely.
I never disagree with me either. She lied. Do you have another question? Don't feel you have to. There are drinks.
think you must have covered everything, Donalda.
Well, if any of you do have any questions that you don't wish to ask here, please feel free to get in touch with us or speak to any of my colleagues in the next while. But it's really, really great to have had so many of you turn out tonight. Humbled. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Donalda. Thank you.